empowering the blind to be excellent, do more, and live with greater success. This show is for you and about you. Welcome to the Delivering Access Podcast. So welcome back, Delivering Access Nation. We are thrilled to welcome our guest, Mr. Michael Hingson of the Hingson Group. Michael, are you prepared to empower?
Always, absolutely.
That's great, man. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in. If you could tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, how you became blind, and some of the tools that you've used along your way.
So I've been blind my entire life. I was born in 1950 in Chicago, Illinois, became blind because of what at that time was called retrolental fibroplasia. Now it's retinopathy of prematurity. Who knows why they changed the name, just to confound the world. But I grew up with parents who believed that I could do anything that I chose to. The doctors told my parents to put me off somewhere and send me to a home because no blind person could ever amount to anything, and my parents rejected that. So I grew up with a positive attitude. Along the way, I faced a variety of different types of discrimination. Probably the first one was one I didn't know about, which was that my parents wanted to buy life insurance for me, and they couldn't because even as a baby, the insurance companies said that I was blind, and so I was a risk. So, but for me, the first real substantive kind of discrimination I faced was actually being removed from a school bus in 1965 because I had a guide dog. We fought that case and won.
Okay.
By interacting with the governor of the state of California. And I went on to college. I have a master's degree in physics from the University of California at Irvine. Most of my adult life has been spent in the computer profession, in computer sales management. I've owned my own companies and have interacted with the public selling standard high-tech products. My first job out of college was more in the blindness system, as I worked with the National Federation of the Blind as an employee and an active member, helping to finalize the first production model of the Kurzweil reading machine developed by Ray Kurzweil. Ray had approached the Federation and said that he had a product that would help blind people read, and sure enough, it did. So we worked with Ray. I literally traveled the country for 18 months talking to people about the machine. We set several machines up in various places around the country so that people could use it and test it and give us feedback as to what they would like to see in it. That led to the Kurzweil reading machine, which later led to smaller versions, which later led to the software known as the K1000, which Cambian Learning System sells today, which later led to the KNFB Reader Mobile, which primarily we've been the national distributor for. That's kind of now changing as they're moving toward an iPhone app. So there aren't phones that are available today, that is new phones that support the reader, which has been an extremely successful product, but it will be going to an iPhone app, and that process is underway. I'm out of that loop because I'm not employed by KNFB Reading Technologies. I'm employed by the company I own, the Michael Hingson Group. So my last job in professional sales took me to New York City, where I opened an office for a computer-based company called Quantum Corporation. We opened the office on the 78th floor of the World Trade Center, Tower 1. My job was to manage the company's office in New York, directing a sales force, directing service people, directing others to sell tape backup equipment. We sold at the time, de facto standard that Wall Street and other companies used to back up all of their data. I was in the World Trade Center on 9/11, and needless to say, got out. And then the media got my story. And so since then, we've sort of changed a little bit in the direction of what I do. Instead of selling products, I sell attitudes today. I am a national, international public speaker. I literally travel the world talking about trust and teamwork, talk about making choices, talk about inclusion in our lives as opposed to diversity, because I think diversity is, very frankly, a joke. When people talk about diversity, they talk about race, they'll talk about sexual orientation, they talk about gender, and very, 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 very rarely ever talk about disabilities. Well, inclusion means you can't leave disabilities out. You can't be partially inclusive. You are, as far as I'm concerned, inclusive or you're not. And as I tell people, the best way to look at it is don't let your sight get in the way of your vision. People say, well, you're visually impaired. And I say, nope, not at all. I don't necessarily see with my eyes, but my vision's great. And that's important for people to understand. We oftentimes underrate ourselves. We oftentimes misassess us and others because we get too focused on one thing. And in the case of most people in society, one of the things we get focused on is eyesight. We think that without eyesight, we can't do anything. And that is absolutely and totally 100% false. Today in our world, we have a society where 70% of blind people are unemployed. Not good. But it's not because blind people can't do the work. It's because sighted people think blind people can't do the work. And unfortunately, oftentimes blind people think they can't do the work. The reality is we can do whatever we choose to. And so this is a time, and for people listening to this show, you can do whatever you want. You can go out and do anything that you choose, including driving a car, as Mark Riccobono now and others have demonstrated through the Blind Driver Challenge that was initiated by the National Federation of the Blind. Anyone wants to learn more about that can go to www.blinddriverchallenge.org and see Mark Riccobono driving a car. But the bottom line is that we can do what we choose. It's easier today than it was when I was growing up because there is more technology, but make no mistake about it. The technology is only a tool. It gets back to attitude. It gets back to philosophy. And either you have a philosophy and you step out and embrace it, a philosophy that says that I'm as good as the next person and I can do what I choose to, and then go out and get it done.
Absolutely.
Or you don't have that philosophy. The technology helps. When I grew up, I actually had to develop, with help, actually somebody else developed, but I was involved, the first calculator that I ever used. Then other talking calculators came along. But I didn't have access to technology like we have today. I used a circular slide rule that was developed somewhere in this country. I used mostly a tape recorder for listening to books that others recorded. I had transcribers, volunteers around the country who put books in Braille, and that was it. We didn't have Braille notes and other things. And I'm not saying that people should grow up not having those things, but I do believe that we need to do something about learning the basics before we go elsewhere. So, for example, there is value to learning to use a Braille slate and stylus. What happens if your Braille note suddenly dies? I always carry a slate and stylus in my briefcase. Learning to read Braille is an absolute must for any blind person in this country. It's the only reading and written language that we have. And there is no excuse for anyone not learning Braille, and educators who don't teach it to every blind person are, as far as I'm concerned, committing a crime. Let me stop a second and define blindness. Blindness doesn't mean you don't have any eyesight. Blindness means that your eyesight is diminished to the point where you have to use different techniques than just your eyes to be able to function. If you can only read large print, you are blind, period. That means that you learn the techniques of being blind, which include using your eyesight where you can. But if you only rely on that, you'll get yourself in trouble. And there are too many examples of that have happened. So technology along the way was minimal for me until only the last 10, 15 years. Now I have a calculator that talks that I use on a regular basis. And I'll sometimes use the one that I have on my iPhone, which, oh, by the way, is accessible. Because Apple is the only company that has developed a product or a methodology in all of their products to make those products accessible. Where Apple doesn't follow through, and where I believe it's extremely unfortunate that Apple didn't carry it the rest of the way, is that they do not have minimal standards in the iPhone App Store for apps being accessible. There are way too many apps that should be accessible that aren't. So Apple did make the iPhone itself accessible, but they haven't taken the other step. So I don't totally regard Apple as being inclusive, but they're further along toward going to inclusion than anyone else. And hopefully at some point they will see the error of their ways and truly put minimal standards in the App Store. And we can talk about that later, but that's anyway.
Yeah.
So today I use GPS products. I travel the world. Literally, I leave on Saturday and I'm going to mostly be on the road for 3 months, traveling and speaking, and I'm all over the place. People can learn, and I know we'll talk more about this later, but hey, we'll get it in now. People can learn more about me by going to my website, www.michaelhingson.com. That's MICHAELHINGSON.com. And love to have them come out and hear one of the speeches.
Man.
All right, there's the answer to your question, Vashon.
That question and all the other ones that I was going to ask. So thank you, Michael. You have a great one. But no.
It's been a pleasure.
So
short podcast, Vashon.
Hey, man. Definitely. That was some amazing stuff. So let me ask you, because this is a conversational interview, so I do want to get a couple of questions in. If you were around when calculators were first, out in the mainstream and you was able to work one, then you definitely was around in the start of Web 1.0 and then the demise of Web 0.0 and now the 2.0 web boom. Of the innovations in technology that's out now, what's exciting you the most?
I think there are two technologies that excite me the most. The very fact that Braille is easier to create. We have Braille notes. We have embossers. I remember the first time I was involved with a Braille embosser was at a trade show. Where we actually borrowed one from someone to be able to demonstrate some Braille production with the Duxbury translation folks, Joe Sullivan and company. But now Braille embossers are pretty readily available. And I use mine. I've got a Juliet Classic sitting over here. I just touched it. And I use it to produce Braille on a regular basis. I use a Braille note all the time. I think that Braille is so much easier to have, manage, and produce than it ever was, that again, there's no excuse for people not learning Braille. Braille is a tool, and I think that we have the luxury of readily and systematically using Braille and audio to read. So I like the fact that I have the option, and I use both depending on the circumstance, but I know how to use both and I readily use both. So the fact that Braille is easier to produce is one. Another is reading in general. The KNFB Reader Mobile is as good as it gets. The ability to literally take a picture of a printed page and read it out loud on the spot is great. And at this point, there is no technology on the iPhone that does that really well. Certainly not anywhere to the extent that the KNFB Reader does. And it will be great when they actually get that app up and running on the iPhone. Mm-hmm. The third technology that I think is so important that all of us should learn to use better is GPS. And there are a number of different GPS apps. I have several on my phone, but I must admit that I love the app produced by Sendero the best, the Seeing Eye GPS app that Mike May created. It quickly became my favorite, and I use that. So the ability to actually have a lot more information when we travel, the ability to get information in an accessible form by taking a picture of a page, and the fact that I can produce notes and produce information in Braille or whatever I need are the three most important things. Screen readers on computers really kind of come to be a part of that.
Okay, that's great. So we talked a little bit about being inclusionary, the social stigmas that are out there in society. What's your passion and desires for the blind and in our future?
I think that we as blind people won't have arrived until I can stand in a line at a train station or at an airport and somebody doesn't say to me, oh, you go ahead. You can't really get through this line by yourself, so we're going to let you go to the front. I will be happy when I can go into basically any restaurant and the host, hostess, or wait staff will come up to me and say, here's your menu, and plop a Braille menu down in front of me. I'll be glad when the national average unemployment rate for blind people is the same as it is for the rest of society. And I will do all I can to help make that happen. And that's why I travel and speak. The fact of the matter is, we should be included in society. There is a lawyer, Dan Goldstein, from the law firm of Brown, Goldstein, and Levy, who several years ago gave a speech at the National Federation of the Blind Convention where he talked about the whole issue of discrimination, segregation, and really inclusion. And he talked about the fact that unlike other groups, minority groups, persons with disabilities have not been accepted as a part of society. People of different races, women, even now LGBT folks have been, although LGBT is still moving that way, much more integrated and accepted into society than persons with disabilities. As much as we've made strides regarding technology and other things that people tout so much for blind and other persons with disabilities, the reality is emotionally and down deep, we haven't yet been accepted. We are still second-class citizens, and that is wrong. Martin Luther King, 50-year celebration of the I Have a Dream speech just a week ago. President Obama talked about race, talked about the fact that we need to be more accepting. Not once did he mention disabilities. I got a letter from someone on Monday about the fact that we should be celebrating Labor Day and that we should really be working to bring the middle class more in line, and that's great. But not once did that letter even talk, because I'm sure that the guy doesn't even know about it, about the fact that persons with disabilities in this country can be exempt from the minimum wage standards that the rest of society has. The fact that the so-called Fair Labor Standards Act provides for government exemptions from paying persons with disabilities minimum wage is absolutely abhorrent, especially when the National Council on Disabilities and 50 other disabled rights groups have specifically come out against it. Yet we still have people in Congress. We have Goodwill, who doesn't pay all of its workers minimum wage. And the fact the president, the head of the CEO of Goodwill, said that the people who are complaining about the minimum wage issue are elitists. Talk about being a bigot. He's blind, so he doesn't have any problem getting his $500,000 and $600,000 a year salary. But the reality is, it's all about society having not yet accepted us as equals. And the reality is, we are equals. Technology's helped everyone. By the way, let's get back to that.
Okay.
People who have eyesight have the same concept of disabilities that they've had for years. Yet the reality is, all of them are disabled. Not one person who has eyesight can sit there and tell me that they're not light dependent. They need light to be able to function. Turn the lights out, they're lost. Be in Grand Central Station or Penn Station in New York City when there's a power failure, they're lost. Doesn't bother me a bit. But light dependence has been eliminated pretty much because we have developed, through Thomas Edison and follow-on inventions, the electric light bulb. So now light is a common thing for everyone. So their disability has been mitigated, but make no mistake, the disability is still there, and it creeps up every so often when there's a power failure. So why is it that they shouldn't accept that technology may be a tool that helps us, but the reality is light independence is just as much an equal kind of condition as light dependence?
Yeah, and I can definitely understand that. And to your point, Thomas Edison tried thousands of times to create that light bulb until he finally got a working prototype. And clearly we still have a lot of issues in the blindness community. Aside from your public speaking, what other things are you doing to invoke change in the blindness community?
In 2011, Thomas Nelson Publishing published a book that I wrote along with Susie Flory. It's called Thunderdog, The Story of a Blind Man, a Guide Dog, and the Triumph of Trust. It has been on the New York Times bestseller list 13 times. We need to get it more visible, though, and it needs to be up there more often. But it is a #1 New York Times bestseller. In fact, this week, it has been on the New York Times bestseller list again. And the week that we're recording this, it's right now the 4th of September. So on the 1st, it was on the New York Times bestseller list for the 13th time. So we use that as a way to educate and change. We're working toward making a movie of the book. And the book is my story. It's about me growing up. It's also about what happened at the World Trade Center. But it's really a story of being able to face, confront, and overcome adversity. And that's what it's about.
Okay. And you do lots of public speaking around the United States. I looked at your schedule. I know you personally, and you're very passionate about the things that you talk about. One of the things that I want to dive into and get a brief story on is your journey through the whole 9/11 scene and coming out and doing all that you're doing from that date moving forward. Because, I mean, you've written a book and you've been on several national television shows and a bunch of stuff. Tell us about that story, how it was for you in 9/11, and then kind of move us into your whole entrepreneurial journey thus far.
I think the best way to answer it is by saying I think I have kind of always been a little bit of a risk taker. Maybe it's just growing up and taking a risk sometimes, just crossing a street, not being able to see the cars coming, listening and using my senses. But I learned from getting a master's in physics that paying attention to details is always important.
Okay.
So when I first went to New York for a different company than Quantum, I went in 1996 working for a company called Articon, and I was asked to go open a New York office for the company. We opened it on the 23rd floor of Tower 2. And right from the very first day, when I went into the tower, I started thinking to myself, you know, there was a bombing here in 1993, so I might very well be in this building alone. And I better know how to get out. But it wasn't just that. It was also, I'm the manager of this office, and I better be able to act and look responsible, knowledgeable, and confident, because it's going to be my job as the manager to negotiate, to interact with customers at a managerial and higher level. Mm-hmm. So what am I going to do to make sure I can do that? Well, part of it, and the first part, is adopting the right attitude. The person who functions well as a manager is a person who adopts a positive, confident attitude and says, I believe that I can work with people and I can make them and me successful. I think a manager is a whole lot different than a boss. A boss should be a good manager, but a boss is just somebody who is over others and may not at all act as a good manager. But good bosses are also good managers. Sometimes good managers may not be good bosses, but the best is to be both. Okay. So anyway, my belief was I needed to be a good manager, a good leader, and also if I wanted to survive, I better do whatever was necessary to survive. So literally, I walked the corridors of the World Trade Center when I first got there for hours over a multi-week period to learn everything I could about the World Trade Center, to learn all of its features, to learn where things were, to learn where the exits were, to learn how to get out. And almost every day when I went in, I would think to myself, what am I going to do if there's an emergency today? And I think that helped me develop a mindset that helped on 9/11. So then over time, of course, I got hired by Quantum, and the bottom line is that there we were on 9/11. So when 9/11 happened, we were going to be doing some special sales seminars for a lot of our reseller customers and partners. And I was in my office. A colleague of mine from our corporate office, David Frank, was there. And the airplanes hit the building. We had guests in our conference room. David got our conference room guests out while I was calling my wife to tell her that there had been an explosion or something had happened and that we would be getting out. The plane hit 18 floors above us on the other side of the building. None of us knew what happened. Of course, afterward, a lot of people kept saying to me, well, of course you didn't know because you couldn't see it. You know, that's how people rationalize the whole issue of disabilities. Excuse me, if the plane hit 18 floors above us on the other side of the building, how would any of us know what happened? Hello, what am I missing here? So bottom line is that we got our guests out. Then David and I started down, and we worked together to get out. And we finally made it to the bottom. We got outside, and then we happened to be diagonally across the street from Tower 2 when it collapsed. And so we had to run for our lives, literally. We survived that. All of that is talked about in Thunderdog, interlaced between discussions of lessons that I've learned that helped me to survive on 9/11. And by the time all was said and done, of course, we escaped. And as I said, then the media got our story. And I suddenly started getting requests from people to come and tell my story. And I realized that people were saying, we'll pay you for it. Being a very entrepreneurial guy, I was very glad to hear that, because I was working for a computer company at the time, and that was my job. But at the same time, it was very obvious that another door was opening. There were things, there were issues at Quantum that was making it more of a challenge to work for. The senior management of the company was not managing a remote sales force very well. And in fact, I was even told by one of the senior management people in our division that my bosses were very concerned about me going and doing all these interviews because of the fact that we had to earn a living and they had to earn a living. And if I'm talking on the TV, I can't possibly be selling and doing the things that I needed to do. What's ironic about that was that the week before this comment was made to me, I received a large binder of all the clippings of a number of my interviews and a letter of thanks from the president of the entire company saying, you've brought us millions of dollars in free advertising. So, there's a disconnect there somewhere. But we had wanted to move back to California even prior to 9/11, and then this opportunity came up to work for Guide Dogs for the Blind, and so I took it. And they wanted me to go travel and speak and be a spokesperson for them. It also was clearly a way to start doing more speaking as a career, and so it was a win-win all the way around. And people were willing to pay, so they paid Guide Dogs for the Blind, and we had a compensation structure that worked all the way around. And the bottom line is that I started traveling and speaking. Then Guide Dogs phased out the job in 2008, so I started working on my own to do the same thing. And of course, it became, along with consulting, which I do, a full-time job. So I work with companies who want to find out how to become more inclusive. I will consult with them. I will help them develop strategies for making their organizations more welcoming. I will go speak to organizations and motivate them about that, as well as just how to be better team builders, team workers, team leaders, and so on. And that's what I do, because for me, it comes from absolutely total 100% personal experience. It started for me by getting a guide dog when I was 14. Mm-hmm. The most important thing, as I tell people, the most important thing about getting a guide dog is not learning all the commands and so on. The most important thing is that we learn to be a team. And as the team leader, it's my job to build and maintain that teaming relationship. I've learned more about how to build and maintain and work with teams from 7 guide dogs than I've ever learned from all the experts in the management business, because it's practical, it's personal, and it gives me lots of stories to talk about. So that's what I do.
So break the whole team aspect down to the ground level and just talk about a couple of points that are key to building a strong team.
Good question. The first thing that's important for any team is trust. You're not going to necessarily trust and shouldn't just trust arbitrarily, blindly, and totally 100% when you start working somewhere. But you should be open to trust, and you should find ways to trust. And no matter even what your boss is like, if you don't start the process, then it's never going to happen. It would be great if the team leader demonstrated openness for trust, but you never know where other people are coming from. So you have to start it from within and start with yourself. I believe that we should be open to the idea of trust, allow people to earn our trust, and allow us to earn the trust of other people. Then you're going to find out who you can trust and who you can't. You're going to find out who you can form a team with and who you can't. And I think it has to start by developing your own inner sense of trust. So if you do that, then the next thing that one needs to do is to deal with accountability. And in any team, the team leader especially has to take the initiative in saying, as a team, we all are accountable to ourselves and to each other, and we all have the obligation and right to hold each other accountable. When I hired new salespeople, every single time I hired someone, one of the first things I said to them was, you have responsibilities. You have accounts that you're responsible for. You are to do the selling, but I am a second person on your team. It is up to us to work together to find out how to make that work, because it's different for every person. And I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I want you to feel free to take the initiative, but I will also try to help. We will create a sales team. You'll find out when I can be valuable to you, and it will be different for each person I hire. And I will find out how you can add more value to me. I will learn your strengths and weaknesses. So let me give you a great story that's a perfect example of it. The best sales guy I ever hired, Kevin, who is still selling in the New York, New Jersey area, took that all very much to heart. Typically, he would bring me to meet customers if I didn't meet them earlier in meetings at our offices, which typically didn't happen because there was no need to bring them to the offices. Typically, if he decided it was time to do a major presentation, slideshows and so on at the customer site, he would tell the customer, I'm going to bring my manager along, and he'll be able to answer questions that I might not be able to answer because he's the manager. He wouldn't tell them I was blind, and a lot of people didn't necessarily know that I was blind. In fact, he didn't even necessarily say what my name was unless there was a need to give somebody a name to let us in the building. Mm-hmm. So picture a scene like at Salomon Brothers, which has now left this earth as an entity. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Kevin and I would go into Salomon Brothers. We would walk in right at the time that we're scheduled to meet. We'd go down the hall to wherever it was we were meeting. We did it deliberately to make sure other people were already in the room from the company. We'd walk in, they were all talking. Suddenly the room would go silent. Because what are they seeing? They're seeing their sales guy who's bringing this blind guy with a guide dog. And they didn't know how to deal with it. Now, Kevin would be standing there, and I'd be standing there, and so I'd say to Kevin, so where are we supposed to hook up the projector, because we're going to do a slideshow. And Kevin would say, well, we go up here. And so we go up to the front, and we'd start hooking everything up. And then I'd say, by the way, everybody, I'm Mike Hingson. I'm the Mid-Atlantic Region Sales Manager for Quantum. I'd like to know who's in the room, please. And, they just sit there because they didn't know. They didn't know how to deal with a blind guy. Kevin figured that out. And Kevin also realized that I understood how to interact with people and that I would get these people talking. And of course, they would be sitting there and I'd say, look, all right, we're going to start doing it this way. Who is to my left? And I'd point over to the first seat where I could hear someone, and I'd finally get them to start talking and introducing themselves. So what do you do? And the next person, then we go around the room. And then I'd say, so why are we here? What is it you're interested in? I would never ask closed-ended questions. I wouldn't say, so you're looking for tape backup? No, wouldn't do that. I'd say, tell me about what you're looking for in a tape backup system. Tell me why it's important to you. Tell me, and I would say, and I would ask very nicely to get information, and I would demonstrate that I'm really interested in, because I'd ask other questions along the way. I'd get these people talking in ways that no typical sales guy ever could, because as a blind person, I know that I need to hear all of that to get information about them that other people might get from my site. But the bottom line is, I opened them up in ways that Kevin never could. we learned to function as a team. And by the way, sometimes we'd never get to the slideshow because we would be talking and we'd learn enough to know it isn't time, or we didn't need to. Or sometimes, because I'm very technical and I can serve as a second engineer at times to our regular staff, I discovered that what they wanted wasn't something that we could sell easily, that our products didn't do that. And I would always be upfront with customers and tell them that. And Kevin knew that he could rely on me to do that, even though my company might not be happy with that. The bottom line is, by me telling people we can't do that, we'd score tons of points. And the bottom line is, although they might not buy that product from us, the next time they needed something that we had, because we spent the time to teach them, they would contact us and we get the deal without even sending it out to bid.
Wow. So that's teamwork, folks. And
that is teamwork.
I've definitely experienced it, going to various states to get contracts for the Department of Labor and things of that nature. You walk in and it's like you start talking and everybody's silent, and you really have to take that as an opportunity to open them up and, you know, kind of move them in a direction that you need them to go in. So I can truly attest that that definitely works. It's a couple of things that you mentioned that I'm going to use more in my technique. Mike, this has truly been an insightful and empowering interview. Give us one parting piece of advice. Tell us how we can reach you, and then we'll say goodbye.
Sure, Vashon. If people want to reach me, they can go to my website. They can register for our newsletters, which are not something that comes out often. We've done like one or two this year so far. But they can go to www.michaelhingson.com, MICHAELHINGSON.com. They can also email me at mike@michaelhingson.com. And I will do my best to answer any questions or respond to anything that people want. They can certainly learn more about us by getting a copy of Thunderdog, which is available on our website, or they can go to any of the standard places to buy books, including the Blio bookstore, because it's available in Blio, which means it's accessible, but it's also available on Kindles and other kinds of ebook technologies as well. And of course, we never even got into the whole subject of ebook readers and how the manufacturers are trying to keep from making them accessible, which is totally disgusting.
Michael Hingson Part 2.
But the bottom and the bottom line is, though, that I'm accessible and visible. And if people need a speaker, or if they want someone to come and talk about some of the things that we've done here, and to talk about teamwork, to talk about improving ways of selling, becoming better companies, whether it be regarding disabilities or not, I would love to chat with them and to see how we can work together, which also means, Bashan, your company.
Absolutely. And one parting piece of advice?
One parting piece of advice is reach for the stars and then go get them. The bottom line is, for any of us, we can do what we choose to do. We may not get it done just when we think, but we can thrive, we can function, we can succeed, and it all comes from within. You know, I believe in the philosophy that there is no such thing as the no-win scenario. We may not win it today, but we'll win it at some point. And it's just up to us to make sure that we do all that we can to bring about any victory that we seek.
Amazing stuff, man. Thanks to Aaron Linkson, our podcast producer and sound engineer, Michael Hingson, our spotlighted hero for today's episode. If you like what you hear, give us a 5-star rating in iTunes, and we'll say goodbye for now. In my traditional closing, if you think you can, or if you think you can't, you are right. Think pennies, get pennies. Think dollars, get dollars. See you on the other side.
This has been a Yucca Music Group production. Website 81x.com/Yucca/X. The Yucca Music Group can be reached at 678-608-8969. All rights reserved.